Hello, everybody. Welcome to very early morning here, at least in Pacific time, to a workshop that's part of the larger data science education workshop that everybody is attending. If you found your way here, you probably know that you are in a place where we will be discussing issues of social justice in the data science classroom, human context and ethics, how to teach with them, and why they matter. My name is Margo Boenig-Liptsin. I'm a lecturer in data science and in history at UC Berkeley, and I also lead our Human Context and Ethics program in the Division of Computing, Data Science, and Society. My training is a social scientist. My field of study is science, technology, and society, also known as SDS, history, a little bit of philosophy. And I came to Berkeley because of this really wonderful opportunity to work as a social scientist in helping to develop the data science curriculum. And so thinking about the human, thinking about questions of the social good are really at the heart of the Berkeley data science major. And that's what we would like to do in this workshop today, is to share with you a little bit about our approach to this work, how to teach human context and ethics and social justice, how we've been doing it, especially approaches that support embedding thinking about the human into technical data science courses. Here at Berkeley, for instance, courses like Data 8, Data 100, or Data 102. So this is an invitation to gather together, to have an opportunity to think as a data science community about how we teach human contexts. And really, we want to extend this. The spirit of this 2 hours that we'll share today with you is to really extend an invitation to collaborate and to think together, because we are in the midst of this work at UC Berkeley. We have some practices, ideas, but not, we're struggling with some things. We are learning how to do other things. And I also know that some of you attending here have been already partners with us and our program in thinking of what are their struggles and what are our strong points and how do we do this work. So this is our wish for this workshop, that it really be a time to come together. And at the same time as that is our wish, we realize that we have this virtual format, which doesn't allow us to literally come together in one place or know each other very well. We are also very limited in time. There's a lot that we want to cover, perhaps too much. That's one of our troubles. And also a lot that you've expressed interest in when filling out the registration forms. Thank you for indicating your interest. Frankly, a lot of those things we will not be able to do today. So again, this is just an invitation to a beginning of thinking and working together on this. So let's just let this be the start of something like a community of practice. And we can be resources to one another today and in coming weeks, months, years, as we teach and develop this curriculum. So with that sense of community and partnership, I want to invite my closest colleagues and partners in this project, Hani Smith and Maria Smith, my goodness, I'm already like hybridizing you, Maria Smith and Hani Gomez, to introduce themselves.
I guess I can go. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Maria. I am a rising fourth-year PhD student in the sociology department. I use a mix of qualitative and computational methods to study stigma, data surveillance, and ethics within the criminal justice system. I have been on the HCE team for 1 year. I started as a graduate student instructor where I taught and led discussion sections about the role of culture and history in data formation and decision-making. The following semester, I mentored undergraduate students in independent research as I participated and observed data science research teams. Lastly, as a co-creator of the Data for Black Lives in the Bay Area, I'm hoping to leverage my networks to help organize a community outreach program within HCE to provide graduates of the program alternative social justice career pathways. And then finally, in conclusion, I just want to say thank you all for joining us this morning, and I hope you're able to walk away with valuable information and resources.
Thank you very much, Maria. It's been incredible to have your perspectives and partnerships both in creating this workshop and through the past year. Thank you. Hani?
Hi, everyone. My name is Hani Gomez, and I am a recent graduate from the Electrical Engineering and Computer Science Department at UC Berkeley. And now I am a current postdoctoral researcher, both with the Human Context and Ethics team here with Margo, as well as within the Data Science and Computer Science and Electrical Engineering departments at UC Berkeley. And really, the type of work that I'm focusing on is all around social justice and pedagogy that can be, more inclusive, but really dedicated around STEM fields. Since they're a little bit more of the less inclusive fields, and also it's my field. So yeah, thank you so much for coming, and we're really excited to show you everything that we have to show you. I think it'll be a great next couple hours.
Thank you very much, Hani. And with Hani, we have really this one foot firmly in the world of electrical engineering and computer science, and incredible to have someone who knows so much about building technology, also care so much about its work in the world. So thank you, Hani, for your contributions. So we would like to get to know all of you. And again, that won't be very easy, but you will be able to get to know one another a little bit. Here is a timeline of our very intense 2 hours together. And we will try to, as the organizers, keep things on target. So the first, we will begin by thinking about what does it mean to try to aim at social justice through data science education. And we'll follow that up with a first small group conversation and breakout sessions, just 10 minutes to get to know one another, your colleagues in this call a little bit better. We will continue with thinking of then how do we move from just aiming at social justice to actually what can we learn from tenets of socially just pedagogy, because there has been and is ongoing a lot of work in socially just pedagogy and anti-racist pedagogy and inclusive pedagogy. Again, I imagine many of you know some of this work already, and Hani will lead us through some of the core insights of that work, what it means for our classrooms. After that, we'll transition to thinking through what we want to share with you are 4 analytical lenses from the social sciences that can be applied to curriculum development, as well as constitute the core components of what students learn when they learn about human context and ethics. And we'll explain what those are. And then the last piece of our workshop today will show you some examples of how we ourselves are, again, literally in the midst now, this summer, past spring, this coming fall, of applying these lenses, putting these lenses into action in data science courses. And we'll draw our examples, first one from Data 8 and a second one from Data 100, which Maria will lead. That second example will also introduce you to the data science lifecycle as another kind of tool that can help to bridge the technical and the social. And then we'll conclude with a small group conversation and leave you with a document where we've collected some of our readings, worksheets, syllabi, Jupyter notebooks that we know about, and invite you to, again, be resources to one another, share with each other what you know, what works. And we'll see how we can organize that even to continue after this workshop today. All right, so with that, let's begin this first part of our conversation about what it means to aim at social justice through data science education. There's a lot of aspiration in the title of our workshop towards social justice. There's a lot of meaning and content in the word social justice, a lot in the idea of aiming at it through data science. And therefore, we want to begin by opening up all those sets of feelings and thoughts that come up when we think about social justice and data science. And to do this, one way we would like to try and invite you is to fill out a Padlet. So think about this question for a minute or so, and then, if you will, let me put in the chat the link to a Padlet, which is like a kind of canvas where you can write down your thoughts. If you click on the little, let me show you here. If you click on this little plus sign, a pen will appear. You can add a post, and everyone will be able to read what you're answering. So let's take maybe 2 minutes to think about this question, what have you thought about, or what have you heard others express about how data science can be a means to social justice, and get some initial thoughts here, and then we'll come back to the room and reflect on what we've written. If anyone has any problems technically, let us know in chat and I'll try to respond. And if you've posted your thought already, feel free to look at what others are writing, and you can add a little heart. I don't remember if I enabled the comments feature, but just think about also what everybody else is thinking. So I will try to read some aloud and start to speak to them to see what surfaces. And I invite you also to unmute yourself if the comment that we're discussing is something you wrote, and share more about it if you would like. I have a really hard time, I've realized, in this Zoom environment, reading and thinking at the same time. So I will just focus on reading a few and think as I read them, rather than covering vast expanses of other people's thought. So some things that I'm seeing, again, just mostly at random, of how the map has been populated here, is that some of these, what you are writing, are raising issues about the justice of the technology. So concepts of like fairness come up quite a bit. Here we see the possibility of having and building unfair algorithms. So some of you are thinking in terms of the ways in which justice is served or not served through our existing technologies. This one, barriers to using data science, focuses on another dynamic, that of students being able to, students, or perhaps not just students, we're in a pedagogy environment, so we're always thinking of students being the data scientists, but perhaps other already formed data scientists, some people not being able to practice or recognize themselves as part of the data science project. This one here, reveal injustice, is an interesting take, because it suggests that the way in which data science can serve justice is by not just correcting for existing injustices of technological systems, but actually surface and be a kind of diagnostic tool of existing injustices. this one here also focuses on diverse groups of data scientists to solve problems. Let's see. There are a few that have to do with stories. So here, for instance, I don't know if you can see what I'm clicking on or what I'm hovering over, but I've noticed a few that say that noticing, this one says, noticing when a story isn't being told or isn't being told honestly. And there's one more here about stories of and narratives of data science. Data science is a form of storytelling which can highlight narratives that have been suppressed in history. By acknowledging these stories, new understandings about people arise. So this one is very closely tied to that one I recently read about revealing injustices, the ways in which data science can be a tool for a more just world. Is there anything that anyone would like to say, both especially about kind of patterns they observe or something that they appreciated from what another person might have posted? Feel free to raise your hand if that's the case. Jana, please.
As no one else is talking. I'm the person who put the community engaged pedagogy, and I don't know how much. Let me unraise my hand. That's annoying that it doesn't lower. AKA service learning has been shown to be a high impact educational practice that actually equalizes the playing field for diverse communities of students. And so it serves two purposes. Not only does it make the technology or data science statistics more accessible to populations that maybe didn't think of themselves as data scientists or statisticians, or make college more accessible to, say, first-generation students or ethnic minorities, it also is centered around doing good in the community. So it empowers students to understand their civic responsibility to others through the use of service learning projects and so on. So I just wanted to bring that up in case people were unfamiliar. There's decades of research on service learning and community engaged learning out there in data science. I mean, I teach a community engaged statistics class, elementary statistics class, and have had amazing results with my students in terms of, success in that course and feeling empowered to make a difference. So.
Thank you very much for sharing that. That is a crucial component of what data science both how it can teach and how it should teach in order to be able to give students both the tools and the experiences of working through real world problems and preparing them. Thank you very much. Is there anybody else who would like to speak? Well, thank you for sharing your thoughts in writing, and that is already a good way to collect and feel one another's thinking. Let me go back to the presentation here. So I feel in this workshop and in what Jana just shared with us, there is that in everything that everyone has written, there's a sense that by studying data science and practicing data science each in their own way, students should be able to learn about and contribute to a more just world, to learn about the world and contribute to a more just world. And what the question is that we're asking in this workshop is, in order for that to happen, what should we be teaching and how should we be teaching it? And just to kind of comment on Jana's point that we already are starting to get in some of your posts and your thoughts part of those answers. And what should we be teaching and how should we be teaching? So I want to, staying with this question of social justice more and thinking about the idea of social justice, what we mean by it, and what is our theory of change between data science and social justice. I want to spend a little bit more time thinking about the concept of the social justice as a historical notion that changes over time, and that comes to be a very important concept in our present world that orients education and orients this workshop. So when we use social justice as a term, we're specifically drawing contrast from legal conceptions of justice, away from justice that concerns relationships between individuals, persons, to the creation and support of a just society. Society becomes an object of justice. And just again, to keep trying to get us on the same page and thinking together, I want to propose that we look together at this one definition of social justice. There have been many over time, but this one is kind of representative in the way that social justice is frequently thought about. And I want to think together of what is here and what is not here, what is in this definition and what isn't. So this is a definition from David Johnson, who wrote a book, A Brief History of Justice, and he describes the idea of social justice as, quote, a set of principles from which we may work out an ideally just distribution of rights and privileges, burdens and pains, which can be deployed to assess a society's institutions as a whole and to argue for a transformation of those institutions if they are found wanting. So what's here? First, it's about principles, laying out some kind of principles that can serve, as he says, for a foundation of an ideally just distribution. So distribution also figures here in this conception of social justice. The distribution has to do with certain goods, like rights and privileges, and certain harms, like burdens and pains. And then he's proposing that those same principles can be used to assess institutions of society as a whole. And to see how those institutions are achieving that ideal distribution or not achieving them, so that we might maybe reform them and recognize how we might reform them to achieve the just distribution of goods and harms. So I think where this definition is firmly grounded in that distributional conception of social justice. And what it seems to be missing, which is what surfaced already in our little Padlet conversation, what surfaced in Jana's comment about not just being able to access or being able to wield data science tools, but feeling like what you can do with them really is part of your own sense of self and the world that you want to build. So a certain sense of belonging to data science as a project of making societies is missing from this definition, very typical definition, which focuses more on access and on distribution of harms and goods. I want to spend a little bit more time with this, thinking about social justice. So this is an n-gram diagram of the concept social justice. Of course, we know about the limitations of n-gram as a way to think about any kind of history or trends. So just take this as a visual image that asks, provokes a kind of question around what is social justice? Why is it rising in certain moments of time? What does it mean, and how has it evolved through this long history depicted here of the 1800s to our present day moment? I think one of the things that this image is telling us is that society and social institutions have not always been objects of justice. So the gaze of justice was not always turned to society. And historians have described three key contributions, three key ingredients, if you will, that lead to society becoming an object of justice. And these three, I want to share with you these three really briefly and to say, so what does that mean for our project here on thinking about data science and social justice together? So the first is the idea that all human beings are equal in worth. This is certainly a very old idea, and it has been repeatedly stated, at least in the history of the United States, has been repeatedly put forward as a core foundation of American values, at the same time as we know that it has rarely been actually realized to be realized as an ideal. But the idea that all human beings are equal in worth is old, yet only sometime in the 19th century does it come to mean that if people are deemed to be equal in worth, then societies, the benefits of society ought to accrue to people in equal ways. Previously to that, the idea existed, but it just didn't seem to apply to society at all. So the belief that there would be equal talents of people, that people are equally worthy, did not entail that all people should enjoy equal material possessions or be entitled to have their needs met equally. Another component that also connects the history of social justice to the 19th century is this recognition that human beings are capable of reshaping their world. So again, around the beginning of the 19th century, with the political revolutions, American Revolution, French revolutions that aspire to topple and recreate principles, laws, and nations. And also importantly, because in relation to the Industrial Revolution and recognizing the power of technologies like the railroad or electricity to reshape the world, there is a sense of human beings being capable of taking the world into their hands and building it in different ways, and therefore maybe thinking of how it might be built more or less justly. And a third component in this history of the rise of social justice in the 19th century, and now especially post-World War II, is that of the racialization of the politicization of the social sphere, which is prominently takes place in the civil rights movement. The politicization of the social is the idea that there's an overflow of political meaning and awareness to the areas of everyday life and emotional life. And this sphere, the social, had until this point had largely been a private and depoliticized space. And after World War II, prominent Black movements politicized the social. They asserted that the race and the fact of Blackness, as Fanon had described it, is a realization that erupts, is something that takes place in the streets, that takes place in the public sphere, and that needs to be confronted and worked out there. So there's a kind of a shift in racial awareness, in racial meaning and racial subjectivity that's brought about by the Black movement, where race then is not just a matter of politics, economics, or culture, but operates simultaneously on all levels of lived experience. So this idea of social justice is activated in the streets, right, through real organizing, real sacrifice, deep institutional knowledge and training that goes into that work. So why does this three big ingredients coming together in 19th century and 20th century matter? Well, because I think they certainly point us to a more nuanced understanding of social justice than that which was presented to us in that definition. So we realized through this history that social justice is not just about distribution, but about representation and belonging in a human-made world. And it's about constructing our societies to reflect and bring about that state of belonging and representation. Also core through this history, what we learn is that the work of making social justice has been a work that's been undertaken by marginalized people and their allies. So it wasn't just granted, it came to be made so through difficult labor and work. And then third, we learned that shaping one's world with technology is already there at the origin of the idea of social justice. So technology is at the heart of a project of social justice, even in its history. And so it's really interesting, I think, in this context, to think about what is the project of social justice in relation to data science? How does the concept of social justice, how is it being actively reframed through the work of our students or of activists who are using data tools in the pursuit of justice today? So in order to activate this set of insights at the level of teaching in the classroom, what we in human contexts and ethics do is to begin at the foundation. The first lesson, in the core lesson that we want to tell students, is that when they make technologies, when they do data science work, when they're designing algorithms, when they're designing robots, physical technologies as well, they are engaging in processes of world making. So they're not just instrumentally making a little tool for a specific purpose or designing a process to answer a specific question or answering a narrow research question. They are doing that, but they are also engaged in shaping and making the world. And this world-making perspective, I want to kind of spend the remainder of my few slides with you on. So how do we, and what does it mean to adopt the world-making perspective in technology education? The world-making perspective is invites us to ask about what kind of world is built, what sorts of entities exist in it, with what kind of relationships, what kinds of practices are there in that world. And this perspective is in contrast to a more cost-benefit kind of evaluation of effects of technology, which focus on which might focus on questions of justice, but don't question the changing nature of the world in which justice is a project. So the cost-benefit accounting might focus on is it a just or is it an unjust outcome of a technology? What are the costs and what are the benefits? But the world-making perspective asks about these broader questions of the thickness of the world. Who is it for? Who belongs? Who doesn't fit? And how? One concluding and long quotation, but I like it quite a bit, and I think it says a lot in many words, and so worth quoting in full, is from a scholar named Donna Haraway, who has worked for a long time in UC Santa Cruz. She in an interview, it reflects on this thinking about technology as a world-making enterprise. And this is what she says. She says, you don't know in advance what shape and feeling a non-fitting to a world in which you live has. Sometimes it's super exploitation. Sometimes that's not it at all. But it's another kind of non-fitting that might have to do with different sorts of ideas about what constitutes a satisfying kind of family, or what constitutes a proper relationship with the land and with agriculture. We can get into impoverished ways of thinking about what it's like to live in these emergent worlds. We too get either or categories. Either you're exploited or you're in power. Either you're white or you're of color. You're either privileged or unprivileged. We get these binary ways of thinking going, and then the thickness of the world gets lost. We miss many kinds of exploitations we aren't paying attention to, but we also miss many kinds of possibilities that ought to be nurtured. What I appreciate about this definition is the way that it points us to grappling with the thickness of the world. And it also points us to thinking about the many ways in which non-fitting has. And I think we immediately can think about our students and the variety of students that we teach. What are the different forms of non-fitting? What do those look like? This definition also invites us to think about alternatives. What are other ways of living life? What are other ways of designing? What are other ways of creating worlds with technologies? And it invites us to think about how, from the point of view of people who do not fit into a world, into a world created with technology, but who can't walk away. How do we think about the problems that they encounter, about the world that they encounter, and how do we move towards not just situations where they are included in a pre-existing conception of a world, but able to actually shape it. And this is where, again, we come to data science education as a core piece of action, as a core site, and the classroom as a core site of engaging in both creating a more socially just world with data sciences and shaping undergraduates and graduate students' experience of that reality. So I've spoken a lot. I apologize for leading the morning with this in this very wordy way. I want to invite you now to have a conversation with your peers about some of the things that we began talking about your thoughts from the Padlet, about meanings and transformations and the concepts of social justice, if that's what you care about. But beginning by introducing yourselves and why you're here this morning, why you're choosing to spend 2 hours of your time with thinking together with everyone else about questions of social justice and data science, and to think specifically maybe about a course that you're teaching or designing and how you might introduce a world-making perspective to it. Maybe you already have, and how does that work in your course? And if you get to it, which I doubt you will be able to in just a 10-minute conversation with many people involved already, but if you get to it, consider what are the essential ingredients to make sure that data science education provides a path to social justice. Before starting the breakout rooms, I would like to share with you one more slide, which is something that we use in our classrooms ourselves, called the collective community agreement. It really might be that many of you are teaching with this as well, but we find it very helpful before, especially in this digital environment where we cannot really be in monitor spaces where students are having conversations, or to join those conversations with them, to really keep in mind some ideas about how those conversations should unfold. And we found that these collective community agreements, they support constructing a space where everybody feels like they can participate and knows how to participate on the terms that are agreed to. They allow people to name and their needs and visions for a space. And it can also serve as a living document that can be revisited. And as a teacher, I'm brought in to suggest and correct behaviors that might be, but that might be unwelcoming, especially when we are talking about issues about society where there are many perspectives and many kind of important stakes. So here are some principles of the kind of collective community that we use, and we invite you to practice these in your breakouts today as well. First, to respect gender pronouns and to use them when people are, to share them and use them correctly. To just have one mic at a time and active listening while others are speaking. So letting people finish speaking before starting, being mindful of making space and taking space. So being mindful of how much you are talking and inviting others into a conversation respectfully if it feels like they haven't spoken or might want to speak and not feel, especially in this digital environment, kind of able to. The fourth point is very core to a lot of what we do in human context and ethics education, which is thinking about one's positionality, being mindful of one's own identities and how they might impact how you interact with others. And lastly, approaching the questions, as we all are best when we approach them, from a beginner's mind. So approaching our time together with openness, eagerness, and lack of preconception, like a beginner might, because in many ways we all are to one another. So that's enough of me speaking. I will now focus on making breakout rooms. I will take a look. There are 49 participants, so I'll do 48 participants now. I will do, let's see, we wanted 5 in a room, so 10 rooms. And we will do this for 10 minutes. And if we don't have the full 10 minutes, I will send you a note through message. So please give me a minute to set this up.
Margo, did you see the chat request to put the prompts in the chat before opening the rooms?
Thank you. I didn't. That's a good idea. I will try to try to be sure to do that. Thank you.
I can take care of it.
Ksenia, I don't know if you're able, I don't think anyone is co-host except for me, but maybe I can make you co-host if you could help me. Here, make co-host.
Can you remind me how many people per room?
Yeah, let's do 9 rooms.
9 rooms. Okay. Okay, I'm opening them.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Ksenia.
No problem.
Oh, Maria, if you're not let me make you co-host, Maria.
I think Hani's already she's in
And
her
did Hani go into one? Oh yeah, that's okay. She'll be there.
Okay.
Let me make you co-host. Okay. Okay, I need to check the time because I do have a feeling that I went over, which is not good.
Okay, can people see my
Yep.
screen?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. So I'll just take a breath. Thank you again, everybody, for being here this morning with us. I'm really excited to be able to share all of, the things that we've been thinking through and processing through. I think it'll be really good. I just wanted to, again, tell you a little bit about me. I graduated from the EECS department this December with my PhD. And just to let everybody know, I was really doing a lot more hardware work at the time. I was actually designing little tiny microbots and working in a clean room in a lab. And so I'm kind of now pivoting my work more towards education, pedagogy, and social justice and anti-racist work. So this is a little bit what I'll show you is what I have learned as I have been getting more into this field. I have also been part of, and along with Margo, we've been part of the advisory board for an EECS anti-racism course. So this is a little bit of what we have also learned throughout our experiences. So first, let's just talk a little though about our responsibility as technologists and as data scientists. It is important for us to start to avoid the solutionism. In other words, technology is not always going to be the answer to everything. And as a lot of you have already started to point this out, and that Padlet that Marco put out, it can sometimes even further perpetuate social issues. It also, technology, as we know, has actually a long history of, or a long relationship with technologies of oppression, right? So we are still seeing that today, but we saw it, some examples are like in World War II, technology was used, the census machines that were built from IBM, which was regarded as a great technology, was actually used to classify people during World War II by the Nazis. So we need to be really conscious about, as technologists, about acknowledging, the relationship that our field has actually had with race and racism and oppression. I also want to talk about how technology is normally regarded as being morally neutral. And I have heard this myself from so many different people, especially working in hardware, especially working with computer scientists. I'm always hearing like, technology is morally neutral, right? Like it really is. But I really want to make this argument that it's not. And if an action is being made based upon a decision, then that decision needs to be, made in some way. And that is where biases can already be transferred and easily missed. So we can't really say that technology is morally neutral. And I wanted to share with everybody an example of what I really mean by that. Some of you might have already seen this, but a few years ago, this video on Twitter came out, and it's called the racist soap dispenser. But this is a video taken by, it was actually taken by a Nigerian technologist himself who was working at Facebook at the time. So this is something that was happening to one of our colleagues, our peers in the work environments.
Futurism.
Sorry,
Entering
that's
the future.
Okay, Noel, we try now. One to your honey. Two black. Yeah. Come again, Sash. No. What I have to do to get no, what you have to do is some racialist things. Put some of these are white. Let's say nothing, I'll show again. Nothing again. Right, what's he calling a hand? Man, the black man getting fight all over.
So that video, I mean, it definitely like elicited a lot of emotions in me when I first saw it. And that's one of the reasons that I wanted to share that with everybody. Ruha Benjamin, in her book, Race After Technology, actually mentions that video as well. But it's essentially an example of, so first of all, let's talk about what's happening here, right? This soap dispenser, it dispenses soap based on a feedback sensor. This feedback sensor is a light sensor. It's an infrared sensor. So yeah, it's an infrared sensor. And so it's able to work with a white surface rather than darker surfaces because the lighter surfaces are reflecting more light. And the sensor was actually calibrated to work that way, right? Nobody thought about calibrating it for a broader range of surfaces. So this is an example where there was no perhaps like explicitly, right? You hear constantly in this talks about racism, there's no explicitly racist person or actor, but at the end of the day, racism is still experienced by people. And so it might not be intentional, but this is an example of how structural racism that is embedded in our, internal biases can actually be embedded in technology. And this is also a couple more things I wanted to note about this, was we always talk about facial recognition in terms of biases and encoding biases, but we really aren't also thinking about how bias is actually embedded in so much of design in general, right? So this is also an example of how it's actually hard-coded into our hardware. And finally, think about how technologies, a lot of times doing this work, I'll do this work and people will be like, well, I'm not from the United States. So like, this isn't really pertain to me, like the United States is really the one with the racist systems, etc. First of all, I think we can all hopefully agree that that's not true, but also we have to acknowledge that technologies at this point in the world will be exported everywhere, right? Any technology that you develop one place will likely be global. So we need to actually have a global mindset in terms of our design as technologists. Yeah. So again, technology is not morally neutral. And I also wanted to bring up this idea, like on the same note, you all might have heard this concept of black boxes are not that they're objective in the decision making. A lot of times we'll have these black boxes of algorithms, and we'll just trust it because it's objective. It's fine. But I think there's a lot of things that we need to consider here. First of all, the name itself is already so racialized, right? We're already describing something that's supposed to be mysterious or opaque as black. It's already racialized language. So we can use different language and be more active in even thinking about that. So we can use things like closed box. But even beyond that, we also need to consider who's designing these boxes, what data sets are going to it, where is this data set coming from? Are the data sets already racialized? And then when these decisions are being made, who is actually going to have power and access to be able to contest the decisions that are being made? I also see there's a couple of things in the chat that I'm unable to keep up with at those point, but if anybody or like Margo wants to call anything out, please go ahead. Okay, so continuing on, I wanted to share, so really considering, technology is not necessarily morally neutral, and we need to be really conscious about how we're designing. And so we wanted to share a really good resource here. And let me just copy the link. Everybody.
Hani, we can also, it's part of our resource guide at the end, so.
Okay, great. So it's linked there. But basically what we wanted to share was a talk by Thomas Phillip. It's this YouTube video, and then we also shared a summary of the same video with you in the resources page. But essentially, Thomas Phillip discusses the classroom as an ideological space. And he tries to think of the classroom as such and process of the classroom as such, but not just as an ideological space, but also as a space specifically where racial ideologies are contested and formed. And so part of the argument is also that we can learn these power and ideologies and ways of being in the same way as we learn, just regular content and other practices. Thomas Phillip in his video also discusses this very complex relationship between data and racism, and also data literacy and racial literacy, and what it means to be racially literate as well as data literate, right? And many times, especially if you're using geographical data, your data sets might already be racialized due to already exist in socioeconomic systems, for example, like redlining. So those are the type of things to keep in mind. So this is a really great video, and we just wanted to put it out there for y'all. So I wanted to go into anti-racism pedagogy and what that means, and what it means to implement anti-racism pedagogy, at least so far in my experience and what we have learned. I just wanted to first off start by saying, anti-racism pedagogy, it's an ongoing process. It doesn't start and does not end with a workshop or a class or anything like that. And at this point, it will likely, be an ongoing lifelong process. And it's also a mutual learning experience between all partners. Part of anti-racism pedagogy is the concept of decentering authority and understanding that we are going to learn from others just as much as others might be learning from us. Right, so intersectionality, I think, was one thing that has been brought up previously. So also recognizing the intersectionality of, every individual within the classroom and of the identities of these individuals. And that means And part of like recognizing each other's intersectionality is recognizing the value in each other's lived experiences that really cannot be gained through, more formal education. So social justice work really starts from the inside, right? Like it starts from the people around us at the end of the day. If the people right next to us don't feel respected, or like we are, forming community, then that's really where we should begin, because that's really where it matters, right? So as faculty, you have the power and the position to really make positive influence in the classroom. And even if we're not covering content that's specifically related to race or racism, faculty can always still take an anti-racist approach to pedagogy, an anti-racist approach to teaching. So what does that mean for taking anti-racist approach to pedagogy? For faculty, and really for all of us involved in wanting to take an anti-racist approach, not just to pedagogy, but to ways of being, really, I would also say. It involves being aware, reflexive of our social positions, of our positionalities, right, of our power, being aware of our own oppressed identities, just as much as how we might be complicit in the oppression of others. It's not right, it's not like a binary, but kind of being aware of that complexity of that position. And in the classroom, we can do some things such as not assuming that all the students might have access to the same resources, and being conscious of any other built-in assumptions. Integrating content about people of color throughout the entire course rather than only for 1 week or 1 month, which leads to tokenizing people of color. So really integrating it, all throughout. Also really knowing and teaching the history of your field. Electrical engineering has a very complex history with eugenics. And this is something that I actually learned only 10 years or so into my career. So this is really an opportunity for faculty to reflect and look at our fields and where they came from and who is, predominantly in this field at this moment, who are the largest stakeholders in the field. And then respect other valuable and legitimate ways of knowing. So kind of trying to avoid that academic elitism, sorry. So kind of, respecting other type works of fiction, storytelling, social media that might not be more academically conventional, but still holds powerful knowledge. So these are just a few examples of, I guess like more action that faculty can take. But like I was saying before, it's a learning experience too. So even as I'm showing these things, I think the biggest thing that I have learned in this process is being able to say, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know better. Or, being able to reflect and take a step back and say like, maybe we should do that differently next time, And I think that's the most powerful thing that we can also do is show our students that we are willing to learn with them, right? Because we're expecting our students to go out there and also be humble and learn from us. So one really great way to show them and teach them that is also showing it in action in this way. Yeah. Thank you so much. I'll stop sharing now, I think, Margo.
Thank you, Hani. So we've so far discussed those bigger world-making perspective on what technology does in the world. And Hani has crystallized some of the core practices from anti-racist pedagogy and inclusive pedagogy in the way that it matters for any kind of classroom, and especially data science and computing classrooms. Now what we'd like to transition to is a way in which we here at Berkeley have been using social science concepts, some core social science concepts, to help students to get to understand what are the salient features of the social world that that matter for social justice and for ethics, and how to analyze them and think about their action as data scientists in relation to those issues. So here is we want to introduce you to 4 analytic lenses from the social sciences. These are concepts that we believe can be helpful for data science practice. They offer students ways of thinking about the social and ethical contexts that are relevant to their work and practice. And they can also be tools for us as instructors to shape our curriculum towards addressing and working through human context, ethics, and social justice issues. So what are these four core concepts? And then in the next section, we'll show you how we apply these concepts and put them in action in different coursework. So the first concept, which something we've already surfaced quite a bit in our conversation, is that of positionality, which a simple definition that we've created is the capacity of being aware of how the opportunities and limits of one's identity, expertise, and power inform one's perspectives, aspirations, actions, and are shaped by one's relationships and environments. So positionality invites us, students, practitioners, teachers, as Hani said, anyone just being in the world, to think about who we are. And specifically in the context of data scientists, it invites us to think about our identities as data scientists, as engineers, and to realize that there's more to what we bring to our data science work than just that identity of being a scientist or an engineer. So our experiences, training, how others see us, what qualities of our identities come through, are brought through in our environment, in relation to those who are around us. All of these factors influence the way in which we see problems, approach their solutions, and communicate results. So positionality is deeply important for technological design. And so thinking about how to bring positionality as a lesson or build lessons around the concept of positionality in data science classrooms can really be helpful in opening up and speaking to the anti-racist pedagogy tenets. The second concept is that of power. Power defined as an asymmetric capacity of a person or technology to structure or alter the behavior of others. And importantly, we want to draw attention to the way in which scientific and technological power is intertwined with social and political power. So what do we mean by that? So first is to distinguish some ways in which power and technology or knowledge relate. So knowledge or insights that are obtained through data science work or through devices can be instruments of power themselves. We can think about this as knowledge being power. Knowledge is power. Right? We know that knowing something gives us a certain power as human beings. Similarly, finding out something about the world is a form of power, and it gives that power to certain institutions who use that knowledge. And that's how data science contributes to political and social power. Also, though, the acts of producing knowledge about the world or about human beings are acts of power over the world and human beings. They're acts of control and of influence. So in that sense, we can think about knowledge as power, because knowledge, in order to produce knowledge, requires power. It requires existing structures of power to operate, to give the researcher certain access to tools, to the knowledge itself, to data sets that they need in order to do that work. And it requires putting oneself as knowledge maker, as technologist, in position of power in relation to the subjects of one's study or objects of one's study. There's yet another deeper way in which power works in our world, which is really salient for data and technology practice. And that is that acts of knowledge as power give rise to entities and social arrangements. So in other words, we come to be who we are through power relations. So power relations really saturate the social world. And we as individuals, as gendered, racialized, engineering or social sciences individuals, all of our identities are formed through power relations. We don't pre-exist them. And so that's that constitutive role that power plays in shaping and changing the landscape of the world. And the data science practice as a form of intervention in those power relationships, not just in the simple way of giving power to some, taking it away from others, not in that zero-sum game, but in that constitutive way that we want to teach students to think critically about power in data science practice with. And if you think back to Hani's presentation, this concept of critically thinking about power is one of the core tenets, along with thinking critically about positionality in what it means to do anti-racist pedagogy. And third concept is that of socio-technical systems. Now, this concept has become quite important in a lot of work that crosses between society and technology, in part because of the term. It's capacious, and yet it's still important and nuanced enough that it names something for students that we find really opens up their thinking about the relationship between technology and society in helpful ways and helps them learn and consider the human and the social. So the definition of a socio-technical system is an organization in which the actions of people and technologies are intertwined. And we observe that these systems, therefore, they have a profound importance to the ways in which risks, opportunities, power is distributed, and that these distributions in socio-technical systems are uneven. They're wide, they're dispersed, and they create very unique, novel challenges for governance of these systems, for their guidance towards certain outcomes. So this is a concept that allows us to wrestle with the layered capacity of change, of making change, the multi-dimensions of human action, the ways in which doing data science work is never separable from those contexts in which the data sets come from, the histories of the field, the interests and desires of the corporations or institutions that set up and frame the problem itself, the people who will enact and work with that knowledge that once it has been made. So it really kind of gives students a capacious, expanded set of ways of thinking about the nested relationships between the human and social factors at work in the world. And again, and think about their place as data scientists in that structure. And then the final concept is that of narratives, which interestingly came up in our Padlet activity already, the importance of narrative to data science's core. But narratives are also really core to who we are as human beings and to our social lives. And this is why I think, in part, one of the reasons why data science is such a promising and significant human pursuit is because of its close relationship to narrative. So having students think about the ways in which, learn about how data science shapes narratives that are at large in society and which people use to explain who they are, how the world works, what needs to be done, narratives that motivate action, and how data science through its forms of problem solving, its means of its tools, its perception of the world, its forms of communication, help to motivate certain kinds of actions, help to make possible certain kinds of futures, designate certain ways of being as desirable and others as not. So having students wrestle with data science relationship to narrative is a very fertile place for implementing and teaching the social justice issues in the data science classroom. So I now hand it over, having very briefly introduced these 4 concepts. We will provide you with a resource sheet that you will have the slides with the definitions. We'll provide you with resources where you can go and read much more about where these concepts come from. As you can see, and as you know, these concepts are large issues, from the social sciences and technology. They've been studied extensively for centuries, and there's a lot of incredible work on making sense of them, grappling with them. This is just a boiling down to definitions that help us to concretize our work in the data science classroom and our student learning. So there's a lot more that can be done with this and learned about, and many ways in which they can be put into action. And again, here we see in this last section of our presentation, we want to show you 2 ways in which the lenses can be put into action. Before we do, one quick observation is that, again, the lenses are very versatile. They can be applied by data scientists who's working through their own data science problem in a team. They can be applied by a student who's learning about what are human contexts and ethics and social justice implications of data science, and to think of how they might, how they might start picking apart those issues and learning something about them structurally. And they are also useful for us as instructors when we are designing or redesigning our courses to develop lessons about the human. And so here are the first lesson. Oh, the first lesson is mine. I keep wanting to hand it over to Maria, but the first lesson is mine. All right, so we'll be focusing these two lessons on the instructor's approach. And someone is asking about Annika Cruz. Annika Cruz is an undergraduate data science major at Berkeley who has been working on the human context and ethics team, doing these incredible designs of images in partnership with all of us here in HCE, thinking through how to represent the things that we care about and want to teach with in ways that resonate with students. So another wonderful example of representation, data science, art, and an amazing student at the heart of that work. So that's Annika. Thank you, Annika. Here is, okay, the first lesson that I want to give is, let me back up, is about how we can use these lenses to review a syllabus for opportunities to think about where human context and ethics lessons might be fruitful, might be useful, might be particularly impactful for students. So first, an observation that existing data science courses can be really wonderful opportunities for embedding human context and ethics lessons, right? Data science begins with questions about the world, and we teach with real world examples and data sets already. So that's a beautiful place to start for thinking about adding, using that existing context to amplify it and add lessons that build, for example, on these 4 core concepts, which are resonant with anti-racist pedagogy, which are resonant with a world-making approach to thinking about technology, so that we can teach students that in the context of their courses, technical courses like Foundations of Data Science course, like Data 8. So in this lesson, I'm going to show you how we might use these lenses to look at the existing context about from Data 8 as an example. One caveat, as I mentioned at the very beginning, this work is absolutely ongoing. Currently, right now, we're working with student teams, we're working with course staff in Data 8 to try out this technique, to put these lessons into practice into the course. So what I'm sharing with you is really in media res. It's right in the middle, and it's we don't have the answers. We're not even doing it yet very well at Berkeley ourselves, but we're aspiring to. So here are, to begin, some examples of real-world context in Data 8. This is a partial list. The examples that are here come from the textbook, they come from homeworks, they come from discussion sections, they come from labs, they come from mentions in lecture. There are obviously many, many real-world fascinating examples and figures people mentioned in the course, because the course has always been about connecting to the real world and showing students how data science work applies. So our intention as human context and ethics is to engage these real world contexts that are already embedded in Data 8 and to build lessons around the, let's say for now, though, these 4 core social science lenses into the course around this context. So do any of these at first glance seem to be interesting contexts to engage? You can put something in chat, like if you were going to teach this class, which of these contexts might be particularly interesting for you to try to engage? And you can be thinking with the lenses that we already mentioned. All right, well, we can keep thinking. Harry Potter, yeah, okay, there we go. Somehow with chat, once it starts coming, it really comes. Yeah, so every single one of these are opportunities. You're all mentioning different ones. Thank you. So here is how would propose going about thinking, okay, we have this list of contexts. How can we think of these analytical lenses and use them to start to unpack and build lessons around these contexts? So I will, in the resources, link you to a worksheet that these next few slides are drawing upon. So the slides that I'm showing you, the table here, is only a partial view of that bigger table in the worksheet. So you'll have the worksheet in case you would like to try this out on your own syllabus. But we have here our analytical lenses, just for now, for simplicity's sake, just one here on sociotechnical systems. And in the next column over, we have some questions that can be asked, that as an instructor, we can begin to ask ourselves about real world examples with this lens in mind. So for example, what sociotechnical systems are at work in the real world example? Consider, for instance, what technologies, infrastructures, institutions are necessary to create and maintain the data set or some context of the example. So start thinking about that, where that context, that example from the real world, and how what are the various social and technical realities in which it is nested and which kind of play a role in its development, in what matters about it. We can ask also, does the data science work that we're asking students to engage in, for example, seek to transform the way that the system operates? So frequently, data science work might, in addition to try to identify, find some pattern or identify some insight about a data set, it might also be in the context of trying to be more efficient or trying to build a more transparent system. Maria will speak quite a little bit about those broader purposes of data science work that really kind of come back to lessons about sociotechnical systems, of the way in which the whole system is being shifted, informed by the data science practice. So you can think about that dimension of sociotechnical systems. There are other questions that can be asked, and I invite you to look at the worksheet for them, but just keeping this to a very straight, simple example. So taking these questions now back to the real world examples in the syllabus, we can think about which examples from that list might be very interesting, particularly from the point of view of teaching and learning about sociotechnical systems. So again, we might identify violence, this example that uses a data set around violence in California's criminal justice system, for the way in which maybe there's a story there around how that data around criminal justice is produced, around the institutions of criminal justice, and their record keeping and their structural biases, and how that matters for the data science work. We might take on a different example from the course around categories in the census, the racial and sexual categories in the census. There, again, a really interesting sociotechnical system story, potentially, around the census, its history, its roles, its means of collecting data, its means of representing complex social phenomena in terms of categories. How those categories matter to whom, what work they do in the real world. Again, just examples, the Uber movement project, which is an Uber kind of data set that shows people how, on a level of a city, how the Uber cars that drive through collecting the data, and it can show urban planners reveal certain features about life in their city. That's another example where there are sensors involved, systems involved, private companies involved, that can be a really fruitful story about sociotechnical systems. So begin using those questions, looking back at the examples that you've got, the real world context that you already have, and draw out some and pick a few that seem to be interesting with regard to that lens, and then start digging deeper into those examples. Start learning more about their contexts, their histories, and building out a little narrative about them. And then you might, as the next step, think about what broader learning objectives that are really connected to this example and also really connected to this concept, which is at the heart of what you want to teach, sociotechnical systems. What learning objectives really tie this example to the sociotechnical systems lens? So for example, here, a corresponding learning objective can be that, for students to understand that data are constructed, they're not given. And that data are made with human choices and decisions embedded in them, assumptions that are built in, and that these may need to be questioned. So here is a very important learning objective for data scientists to understand about data categories and how they come about. That really connects well to a number of your examples in your course and to this core concept that you're teaching through those examples, socio-technical systems in this case. I want to conclude by giving you, by sharing with you even more particularly how this might look. So here is, again, from data 8, from homework 3, a homework question that asks students to, the homework covers generally manipulation and visualizations, data visualizations. And here it's asking students to work with a concept called PTER, which means part-time for economic reasons, and to think about this concept, computing an array containing percentages of people who are PTER in each quarter. And it's asking students to do this, to think about this concept PTER in relation to the Great Recession of 2008 and 2009. Now, this is the only mention of this real world context of the Great Recession 2008-2009 in the question. And it's not mentioned elsewhere. So it's this very interesting real world opportunity here to use the existing example to teach about socio-technical systems, teaching about the way that categories are choices, for example. So Great Recession, as I mentioned, it doesn't actually do any analytic work in the way that this question is written. It doesn't teach them much about PTER, doesn't teach them much about the recession or measuring unemployment, but we can begin to think of how we might write a very short few sentences, a little paragraph, with a more detailed contextualizing explanation of the Great Recession that can also help students understand what's at stake in data science study of unemployment, right? It can provide some context for this category of part-time for economic reasons. What does that mean? How did economists come to that category as an important one? How do they measure it? What is its real world meaning? What kind of people become that category? Here we cross over to the lens of positionality that we're also teaching. For what structural social reasons? Here we cross over to the lens of power, right? Maybe we write this paragraph and we satisfy ourselves with that. Maybe we do even more, where we think about varieties of possible lessons. So we could teach this as an example of how economists measure complex issues like unemployment, and therefore teach about data science representation, about socio-technical systems. Or we can choose a different lesson around power of the unemployment as a category and how, for instance, it drives policy. So you can see how you can tie this very basic lesson around building an array, visualization and manipulation of a table to richer contexts that can really unlock both understanding of racial structures in the United States and understanding of positionality, power, socio-technical systems, and various narratives. And finally, if you look back at that list of data 8 examples, you'll notice that there are actually a lot of examples that work on the economy. And so you might think, looking across the whole class, how you could build a few lessons that help students to make sense of these economic categories better, and think about data science practice in relation to economy and economic policy, for instance. So there might be an even more of stepping back and pulling out to broader lessons across the course that connect to the specific real-world context. So I want to leave you with this checklist, which is also featured in that worksheet, about how, again, to recreate this whole process that I just very briefly covered. Begins with compiling the real world examples. And reviewing those examples. Perhaps you want to do this review in conversation with another peer, with a colleague, maybe with a social scientist or historian who might know those contexts from a different perspective. Those are really fun conversations. So they teach us a lot about our own material. So reviewing the examples with the 4 analytical tools in mind, identifying a few that you can connect the analytical lessons to, which are the most compelling. Remember, there's no right and wrong. All real world examples have each of these lenses figuring in them somehow. It's just a matter of what's the best fit, what makes sense for your course, what makes sense with your technical lesson specifically. Mapping out the learning objectives that connect here, and then perhaps looking across the syllabus and connecting the individual lessons to one another. Okay, Maria, I'm sorry to everyone for rushing. Sorry, Maria, to press you to finish everything in 25 minutes. And okay, I stopped talking. Thank you, Maria.
All right, so you guys have to bear with me. I'm so nervous. So let me, okay. Share, and you guys can see my screen, yes. All right. So I will be talking about lesson 2, activating questions about racial equity with the data science lifecycle. To do this, I will use an example about the Cook County Assessor's Office as our example. I need to move some things around on my screen there, that's better. Okay, so first I want to address this one issue that I feel like this is a good starting place for all of us to have a shared understanding and concept that equality is not the same as equity. So equity can lead to equality, but it can't be reversed, right? Equality means each individual or group of people is given the same resources or opportunities. Equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the exact resources and opportunities needed to reach equality. As has already been iterated throughout the conference, systems that may appear unintentional have been designed intentional. Well, maybe not intentional, sometimes intentional, not intentional, but they have been designed to reward certain demographics while punishing others. But despite intent, these systems are rooted systematically in discriminatory practices and beliefs. Equity is a solution for addressing imbalanced social systems, whereas justice is the fix, right? It's the things we implement to try to correct for the imbalance. And it could lead to long-term sustainable access for generations to come. In other words, justice demands a multifaceted approach that requires the political, economic, and social as a structural whole, as a system, to work in collaboration to create real change. An algorithm, no matter how accurate, how well-intended, cannot in and of itself fix equity, right? And this is a concept I would like you all to just keep in the back of your mind as we continue through with the examples and throughout the questions we need to ask ourselves as we interrogate the Cook County example. Finally, it's not enough to simply, let's say, interrogate racial equity, just like it's not, or sorry, not integrate racial equity, sorry. Just like it's not enough to treat race as just a simple variable, right? It must be used as a lens from which we interrogate and truly investigate our data and try to understand what is truly happening within the context of our data. So in other words, it needs to be implemented throughout the entire data science workflow. To avoid the reproductions of harms caused by systematic racism and bias, this is a must. Anti-racism requires it. So with that, we'll continue. All right, so what is the data science lifecycle? It is a framework for data science practitioners, students, and teachers to embed considerations of human context and ethics of data directly into the data science workflow. With that, I want to show you all a website that was created, an interactive website that was created for you to think through these various steps within the data science lifecycle. So you would begin, and it's not in any particular order. Let me say that first too, because as we know, research is not a linear process, right? It's this constant bouncing around, going back and forth until we reach the final destinations of our conclusion. So we'll generally start with identifying a problem. So on the website, you would select this. It describes what that process looks like. But the more important and like special part of this, the one I enjoy the most, is that it also breaks down those lenses and it asks you questions throughout each phase of the process to make sure you are checking yourself, your process, and truly being equitable and inclusive in your research. And this too will be included in the resource guide. But I won't go through all of these just because we are short on time already. So continuing, it really sets the tone and foundation for inclusion and racial equity. And according to the Actionable Intelligence for Social Policy, this is a program at the University of Pennsylvania, and they created a toolkit for racial equity, which is also included in the guide. They state, while acknowledging history, systemic harms, and the potential for more harm is a necessary first step, it's not enough. It's only a first step. The toolkit requires us to go further, to center the voices, the narratives, and expertise and knowledge of these marginalized communities in decision-making. It demands we as researchers with fancy degrees share and dispense power in order to produce social good. We have to share our power. We have to invite more people to the table in order to reach a just society. All right, so this next part, first I want to talk about the course. The course is Data 100. It's called Principles of Technique and Data Science. Here's a website. I can include that if you want to learn more about the course and what it offers. And you can also Google it, but I'll provide that as well. So what is the course? It's not working. Okay. So it's an upper division undergraduate course. It's meant to bridge the gap between Data 8, the course that Margo just covered, and uppers classes in computer science and statistics. Issue with my clicker. Maybe the spacebar works. Okay. It implements elements of data science lifecycle to explore quantitative critical thinking skills. The course lessons includes, normal statistical models and regression, classification and clustering, data visualization, statistical concepts of measurement of error and prediction, and techniques of scalable data processing. All right, so now this is the example. This is the Cook County County Assessor's example. So it's a multi-layered role of data science, and its role is uncovering corruption and racial discrimination by proxy of class and housing assessments. And it was used in 2019. So when we say it was a multi-layered role of data science or data analysis, starting back from my mind is drawing a blank now, segregating houses by race, the redlining, that was all done systemically and analytically, right? So that was compiled with additional statistical models that continue to compile and create this unfair system. So the Chicago Tribune found that statistical models were used to assess the value of property, and it was inaccurate. And then there was an appeals process. This is the socio-technical part, right? It is layered systemic role of other systems outside of statistics and data science that contributes to the unfair process, but the appeals process that goes into the court was also unjust and unfair, and many people couldn't access the court. They didn't have the resources to do so, be it a lawyer or the understanding of how the property taxes work, sorry. So it benefited wealthier homeowners, allowing them to pay less in property tax. So the problem was that properties were in predominantly Black neighborhoods were responsible for a greater share of the tax burden. The solution, they replaced an old statistical model with a machine learning model, right? It still inherited old statistical models, but it was updated and supplemented with more data, which can in and of itself be an issue as well, because as we know, more data sometimes equals more visibility, right? And that could create and lead to other systems of inequality. And it's something else that we need to be aware of as we, work in data science. The other solution was to create a transparent system. So they created an open data initiative, and they made all of the data available on GitHub. And it's something that you too can access if you wanted to review the information. The new model significantly increased accuracy. And the model predicted values that were much closer to the actual marketplace or market value. This in combination with open source data also impeded much of the corruption at the appeals process. All right, so the objectives of the Cook County Assessor's Office case study, alongside this learning how to perform statistical modeling, feature engineering, visualization, the lectures and homeworks invited students to consider the following: the relationship between a model, the social and technical system in which it is deployed, and the historical institutional context in which it works. And I'm going back to the first bullet. This is what we talked about, that socio-technical system, the compiled layer of the legal system, right? How it intertwined with the inequality, along with how the social and racism worked within society. All of that was compiled together to create this very unjust and unfair system, right? The relationship between fairness and accuracy. This kind of goes back to the first thing that we talk about, right? Equality for everyone doesn't mean fairness. It doesn't mean equity. Some people will still benefit more than others. So that was something else that was covered. The meaning of transparency, its relationship to fairness, and what it takes to put transparency into practice. We'll cover this in another slide, but also like what it means to have access to data, who has access to data, who has the ability to engineer a system, and whose ideas of justice are implemented, right? Using this data, because we know data knowledge is entangled with power, right? So the technical and social consequences of automation, and the role of data science expertise alongside that of other professionals and lay publics. This final one is really important because we like to stress to the students that when performing data science and performing statistical models, you too are embedded within this system now, right? You have a role, you have a responsibility, and you have to understand that that you are a part of this now. And so you have to, stand up and intervene. So the other thing that I thought was interesting was even within their emblem, the Cook County Assessor's emblem, see if I can do that. Okay, transparency, fairness, and ethics were things that they highlighted. Now, I don't know if this is new or if it's been there, but it would be interesting if it has always said this and they were practicing this. All right, so some critical reflections and takeaways. So now I'm going to go through the 4 lands that Margo mentioned, and then think through the questions that we both asked our students to think about and ways that you too can implement this, and thinking through how to create discussion questions or just homework questions. So in positionality, we have to consider who are the stakeholders, who are all involved, right? And in that way, if we think about all of the key players, we're able to consider their role and how this might benefit or harm them. And then really ask yourself, do you have the most relevant expertise to solve this problem? Who else might have more equal expertise? With that being said, so not every problem is a problem, right? We even view what a problem is through our positionality and our customs and our cultural relations. So you have to consider that further. And if it is truly a problem, who else is at the table? Is a person from that community represented? Do they have a say in how we look at this as a problem, how we solve this problem? So those are things to think about. And then in the socio-technical systems, how does history and solutionist approaches transform the current problem? So in this case, we talked about how redlining was implemented in risk assessment, which was then implemented in statistical models, which may still be implemented in working in some ways in our machine model that is currently, being used. So we have to think about that role as well. How were the machine how was the machine learning models trained? And on what kind of data? Where did it come from? What sort of questions were asked? Even within that, humans were in that role, right? They asked those questions. They decided which data were data and what was not, right? So power, justice, fairness, and transparency for whom? What do people need to know to see into the system? How do you get access to the data? Who decided what was fair and what wasn't fair? So that's more, I just said this one. And then who benefits from this restriction, right? Why is it that you have access to this data and not others, and maybe community activists, right? So then now the role of narratives. What conceptions of justice informed the original data collection? And then how was the data classified? What story does it tell? And how does your interpretation or bias influence the story being told, right? So now I'll conclude with a how-to checklist, just to round up what we talked about. One, you want to consider a case of inequality or injustice, or inequity or injustice. You should invite voices and perspectives from marginalized communities or social science domains to assist with critical approaches and problem set development. Think through each of its stakeholders, historical context, and harmful implications, and cover that in lecture. Make sure the students are aware of this context. Create problem sets that enable students to practice data cleaning, statistical modeling, and visualization, and critical thinking skills. How could this model have been done differently? Which was an actual question used, right? What other data sets or data points could have been more accurately used to address this problem? And then finally, you want to encourage constant, deep reflection of positionality throughout the lessons, throughout even teaching the material, right? Because teaching is a political act, regardless, right? We are constantly, there's hidden curriculum, there are practices and norms that happen within a classroom. And so it takes even on your own part when you're imputing this information or, dispelling this information, when you're explaining a history, to check self, to be self-aware and understand your limitations of a concept. If you feel like a subject might not be something you're particularly great at talking about, perhaps you can reach out to another domain, have someone else come in and help you explain a concept, right? And this must be done throughout the data science workflow, throughout class discussion, throughout thinking through homework assignments and assigning them. So my final say, this is my favorite quote from Ruha Benjamin. I think I share it every time I teach a class. So one of the things we have to come to grips with is how the nightmares that many people are forced to endure are the underside of an elite fantasy about efficiency, profit, and social control. So I'll leave you with that and then I will stop sharing. Thank you.
Maria, thank you so much. So much behind the scenes work went into not just preparing these 20 minutes, but thinking through the case study and linking the life cycle to the ethical, to the racial equity toolkit, which Maria is really at the forefront of doing. And again, as we say, work in progress. We don't have all the answers. We're just trying to figure it out. So let me screen share for the last time very briefly. Our intention, and intentions are always tricky. Oh, did I screen share with you? Can you see the slides? Yes. Okay. Our intention was to, I'll have a breakout discussion, but we don't have time because in 7 minutes, Michael Jordan will be starting the next part of the workshop. So instead of asking you these questions, I want to leave you with these resources and feedback forms. So the resources document that I've been mentioning throughout, that has been mentioned throughout, I will post in the chat here, and it will also be linked to in the slides, which we'll share with everyone who's registered. The resources document has, let me find it because I wanted to walk you through. It's organized, if you can see again, Maria, can you see the resources doc? Okay, it's organized by the sections how we structured this presentation. So starting with the thinking about the aim of social justice with just 2 references there to the Haraway reading and the Omi and Bunat reading, Hani's section on the tenets of social justice pedagogy, some helpful resources to think about anti-racist pedagogy, to learn about it. Here is the Thomas Phillip lecture, which is a really interesting, very relevant for data science work, video of thinking about race and how racial literacy is learned as part of data science literacy. Highly recommend it. Professor Catherine Carson at Berkeley created a summary, very helpful summary of Professor Phillips' talk. I hope she's all right. I did not check with her if she's okay with us sharing it. Catherine, please feel free to edit this document to notify us of that. In this section here on 4 analytical lenses, readings, mainly readings about these big concepts, just to help you get oriented around them if you would like to know more about power, narrative, sociotechnical systems, and positionality. Here in our section with the 2 lessons, we have the worksheet that I was basing my presentation off of, a link to a webpage, which right now has very little, but the data science ethos lifecycle is in the process of development. Maria showed you a mock-up, which is going to live eventually on the Academic Data Science Alliance's webpage. And once it's there in a more public form, we can share it again. But if you can, feel free to check up on that progress here. And if you want to use the mock-up in your teaching, I want to learn more, just email us. We're happy to share. It's just not publicly broadcast at this moment to everybody. Resources and readings from Maria, and then overall resources. So this includes a document that has some curricular resources we've taught with before in the Human Context and Ethics program. This is a really wonderful resource I would point you to. We have a partnership. Berkeley has been working to develop some of our material. And actually this workshop is partly funded by Mozilla Responsible Computer Science grant that we received. And the team, there's 17 institutions who teach and think about responsibility in computer science, and the relationship between computer science and data science, as you know, is a very fuzzy boundary, at least. We can learn a lot about responsibility in computer science from data science and vice versa. So this is a very relevant community for this group. You're welcome to join it. It has many interesting events. It's having a summit on July 27th, which will be really interesting. And it has this playbook, which has great sections about not just how to teach about justice or how to teach something, with lots of examples from other institutions, but also how to get your institution on board with ethics and social justice as part of data science and computing, core to the curriculum. So lots of good resources there. And then just more about the 2 core courses that our group has developed and teaches at Berkeley every semester. So with that, I want to say thank you once again. There are 3 minutes. I'm happy to stick around and speak with you, anybody who wants to have questions or share anything. I also would like to encourage you to please fill out our feedback form, because you know how much assessment is valuable, and it will allow us to expand our programs and learn about what you liked, what didn't you like, and connect also with you, stay connected with you. So thank you. The recording will probably be made available on the same website that we use to ask you to register for this workshop. And I can send a note to this group once it is available, and I'll post the slides probably to this resources doc as well. Thank you for joining us. Feedback form link has just been posted. I'll do it again. Hopefully that works. It just should take 30 seconds. And the next session is starting up in Hoppin by Michael Jordan, giving an overview of Berkeley data science programs. If anybody would like to say something, share something about your experience too. Ross?
Margo, thank you for another wonderful event. And I was just typing Maria a note, and then you asked that, so I joined in. But last year I did the HCE session that we had as part of this conference, and it was just because it was the next thing on the list. I didn't really have an interest in it. And you and Coral and Catherine and Ari were just so wonderful during the whole thing, and it was just a transformational experience. And
Thank you.
I just absolutely loved it. And this past year, I've tried to think differently and teach differently and give the students a chance to look at things they're passionate about, things they're interested in. And it's just been absolutely wonderful. And the way that you approach it is just so much a part of critical thinking and just basic human decency. So, you know, last year I started at ground zero, and just really it helped a lot. And then this year y'all have added on to the tools. So thank you for what you're doing. It's just absolutely wonderful. And I hope a lot of people take advantage of it, because I mean, all the students that we all have, it has a huge impact eventually. So.
Thank you, Ross. That's such kind words and so encouraging. We're really glad that they comes across somehow, can be taken and adapted to your context, your students, the way things work for them. Thank you. That's such encouragement. And it would be wonderful to hear about what examples you teach with and how you do it and what courses. Yeah, so yeah, that would be.
Yeah, and I can get back with you on that as well, son, but it's just really cool to be able to bring some of these in, because I live in a very conservative area, and compared to most people in this group, I would be considered conservative. Compared to the area I live in, I'm liberal. So I'm kind of
talking about positionality.
You know, exactly. And but what I found is a lot of times I put the data out there, whether it's incarceration rates or whether it is disparate sentencing based on the race of the victim or things along those lines. And I put it out there, and the students see it, and they're like, this just isn't right. This isn't just, you know, and they're kind of outraged a bit. And what I do from my perspective is I'm a business faculty member, you know, so a lot of times I'll say, you know, I agree with you. Check out people in the community that are experts on here. Here's some people you could talk to, or check with your political science or sociology or history or whatever topic that we look at, you know, criminal justice, to try to get them in touch with the domain experts, because I just don't feel like it's right for me to be imposing my worldview on them without that domain expertise. But I can at least raise awareness of the issues and get the students interested in it. So.
Thank you very much, Ross, for sharing that and for the work. Yeah. Does anybody else have anything they'd like to share? Okay. We'll have one more panel on data and justice next tomorrow, which will also be a different take on this, about ways of teaching dedicated courses to this intersection. And yeah, so if anyone's still here and wants to check that out. Oh, Abba, I see your comment. Good, thank you.
Thank you all. Have a great day.
All right, bye-bye. Enjoy the workshop.
Thank you. Bye.
I wish we could have done more breakout conversation. Oh, but we finished what we needed to.
Should we stop the recording?